So, it looks like the war in Ukraine is in the end game now, and it's all bad news for Russia, especially for Putin, all the way up here in Moscow. If my pen will actually work. My pen going to work? Ah, there we go, let's try that. All bad news for Putin. And this is on two fronts. Number one, is a house divided against itself cannot stand. Russia, with maximum effort, was just about holding this front line here. And that's before they started fighting amongst themselves. Sorry, got a bit of a cough. And of course, the core of this is the Wagner Group. First of all, heads us to Rostov-on-Don, and then starts heading up towards Moscow. And this brings us on to number two, which is Game of Thrones. When you play the Game of Thrones, you either win or you die. And this isn't just true for, the head of the Wagner Group or Putin here. This is also true for the entire power structure in Moscow here, which is had its bars severely rattled in that the mere fact that this army general with his sort of mercenary group which is the sort of almost elite of the Russians, sort of Russian army, manages to get sort of halfway to Moscow, and there's nothing really to stop him. This is all sorts of wheels coming off to the point where, if no one will stop them, right? Russia might have troops there, but if none of them are willing to fight to defend the people in Moscow, then there is basically nothing to stop them from just driving up there and sort of shooting the right people and, just changing the guard. Would this be particularly better for anyone? I'm not so certain. And this is almost always the way with these military takeovers, is just to be crazy enough to fight the Game of Thrones, you have to be willing to die for this. And so it tends to be the guy who wants it more, the guy who's more fanatical, tends to be the one who comes out on top. And that's not really that good for stability. But in order to actually be crazy enough to play the Game of Thrones, where you live or you die, or where you win or you die, you need a catalyst for all of this. And when you're taking a look at what might be the catalyst that would make someone crazy enough to try and fight the Game of Thrones, you've always got to be a little careful in putting motives on people, because if you're sane and you're trying to extrapolate crazy moves by a crazy person with sane rationalizations, you're not necessarily going to get the right things. But let's just say that this was actually a rational decision by Mr. Head of the Wagner Group here. Prigozhin or whatever his name is, I can't pronounce it. So I'm going to go for the head of the Wagner Group. He claims that they were attacked by Russian troops. And okay, let's make that a head of the Wagner Group's been making progressively more agitated noises about they're not supplied, they don't have enough ammunition, no one else is fighting, it's all highly uncoordinated, blah blah blah. Which may well all be true, but it's making Moscow look bad. It's making the people who fight the head of the army look bad. And so, sending in the odd targeted missile trying to kill the guy, terrible friendly fire incident, blue on blue, blah blah blah. That if the guy believes that his own side's trying to kill him, then all of a sudden playing the Game of Thrones is not such a insane maneuver. And the plan to move to Rostov-on-Don here was, you can't just pick up an army and go. You need quite some planning to do all of this. But, you know, in Rostov-on-Don, the guy is sort of greeted like a rock star. Difficult to see Putin getting that sort of warm response. On this, he starts heading up the highway, the M4, to Moscow. And whilst he's doing this, of course, Russia's sort of mobilizing all these troops to try and defend, blah, blah, blah. But what's clear is what they've got left to defend all of their stuff is basically deployed here. And it was a sort of tooth and nail fight, grinding attrition just to take Bakhmut, a sort of fairly smallish place around here somewhere. It took them like a year of grinding attrition. And so those were their best troops fighting there. What they've got left to defend Moscow with is sort of their under-equipped, unmotivated conscripts. And if you put unmotivated conscripts against a guy who believes that his life is on the line and he's backed up by a bunch... Now, he's been sung. Putin's been saying that the head of the Wagner Group is like hero of the Soviet Union all of this time. It makes the messaging very awkward on this. Now he's a traitor. The guy who was a hero last week is a traitor this week. And it gets even worse than that. So, once the Wagner Group sort of immediately calls out Putin, he says, these are all traitors and they will be held accountable for their mutiny, blah, blah, blah. And then apparently immediately flees to go to St. Petersburg, up on the Baltic there. And, yeah, there's so much of this which is not a good look in that... it almost looks like, even the Wagner Group is relatively small. It's like 50,000 troops or something. If no one's willing to fight you, you don't need that many troops. And it seems clear that, what they did actually manage to do was dig up some roads and make trenches and open swing bridges and the such like, which would be a significant barrier for any determined push. You only drive. This was basically the speed of driving up the freeway was their advance here. This all looked like bullets whizzing past the guys' heads in Moscow, and you had all these sort of kleptocrats looking very anxiously, wringing their hands. They don't want to die over this. Most of them are sort of fairly sane people, still from the rest of the country and all that. But what this has a lot of echoes. If you're looking at history here, what this is echoes of is World War II. And there are two echoes of World War II in this. The first one is when they tried to kill Hitler in his mountain retreat. I don't know where it was. But when they tried to kill Hitler, they failed. But it really rattled Hitler. And he became much more paranoid. And, when your own side are trying to kill you, that kind of happens. And his response to this was to kill like 2,000 of his own people or something. And you really can't be affording to do that when you are locked in a tooth and nail struggle. And it looks like, the absolute maximum effort for Russia is just holding this front line here. And so, just losing the Wagner Group off the front line here is they're like elite troops. Now they're trying to just sort of incorporate them into the regular Russian army. Some bunch of mercenaries. Which brings us into the second echo from World War II, beyond, just trying to kill your leader here. And the second thing that is an echo of World War II here is don't get locked in a war of attrition with a bigger and better supplied enemy. So, first year of World War II, Germany was basically here, and one army goes up to St. Petersburg, another sort of gets almost all the way to Moscow, and the third one comes down towards the Crimea. And they do pretty well. But the thing is that now their army is spread out on this huge front, and they've basically lost the ability to fight very offensively. In the end, they managed to sort of, they move all their troops down here, and they push over this direction towards Stalingrad, which is Volgograd, which is there. But the bottom, they were basically, after they fail in the first year of the war, they're now locked in a war of attrition. And if you're locked in a war of attrition with an enemy who is bigger and better supplied than you are, which Russia was certainly bigger, and it was better supplied thanks to allies supplying it with the stuff that it needed. Once you're locked in a war of attrition with a bigger enemy, defeat is inevitable. It's just really a question of how many body bags you fill before you get there. And that's basically where I see Russia is with its war in Ukraine, where it's absolutely struggled just to hold this line here. And there are other metaphors for this or examples of this in World War II. The other one is Japan. So Japan was obviously much smaller than America, did very well early on in the war when it was basically fighting against an enemy that wasn't greatly prepared for it. But once you get into a war of attrition with a guy who has more stuff than you, for the guy who has more stuff, wars of attrition are absolutely fine. And so all America really needed to do was get Japan into a war of attrition, and eventually it was going to be bad news bears for Japan. And so what they did, let's see if we can actually do this. Let's go all the way to the other side of the world. So it was some crappy island down here, Guadalcanal or something. Is that it? Yeah, it looks about right. It's one of these islands down here. It's quite looks much better. There we go. So they fight. Basically, they get locked in a war of attrition. I'm pretty sure it's here. And they grind the Japanese down. And once you can no longer fight an offensive war, you're sort of locked into a war of attrition. And once you can no longer fight the defensive war, you just get pushed back and pushed back and pushed back until you eventually have to concede defeat. And so what happened in Ukraine is they have their front line here, and that was really maximum effort for the Russians. And whilst the Ukrainian counteroffensive, I mean, the mere fact that you're talking about a Ukrainian counteroffensive after a year's war against Russia kind of instantly dispels the idea that this is a military superpower. Right? When you're talking about Ukrainian offensive, you're doing it wrong as a superpower, right? And so, especially this is right on their doorstep. And you can make similar arguments about Vietnam, America lost that as well. But other reasons why this is going badly. So when your enemy is about to go and attack you, what you do is you do the most you can to spoil the enemy's plans, which, as the old saying goes, no plan survives contact with the enemy. So the first thing they do, of course, is they blow up the dam around here somewhere. There we go. And that has the wonderful effect that it causes lots of disruption. There's this huge, it's called an inland sea, it's bloody massive. It's a giant freshwater lake. But this provides irrigation for huge portions of Ukraine. And if you actually zoom in to Ukraine, especially the sort of part that we're talking about, what you'll see is it is just farmland, irrigated farmland, as far as the eye can see. It just goes on and on. And when you get down into the Crimea, again, there is nothing there except lots of farmland. And of course, you've got Sevastopol, which is the big city and the big naval port that sort of controls the Crimea. But, for the rest of it, it's basically open farmland. And the majority of that is supplied by canals that are all fed from this giant reservoir here, which is now empty. So all of this is now basically screwed as farmland, which will likely have, long-term impacts when it can't grow as much food as it used to. But other consequences is you'll notice there is another canal down here, which actually gives the water to the Crimea. So this huge reservoir here also fed the Crimea, and it doesn't anymore, which makes this a much more... I mean, getting water for people is relatively easy. They don't need that much water. Water for farming, it takes like 10 times as much water or something. Anyway, so these are sort of disruptive things that you do to try and spoil the enemy's plans. But, big picture stuff. Incidentally, you might worry about the nuclear reactor not getting enough water, for cooling like the one in Fukushima did. This is nothing like Fukushima. Fukushima, the reason it all went pear-shaped is because it happened after a bloody huge earthquake and tsunami that basically trashed other elements of the country's infrastructure. If it hadn't been for that, all you need is a relatively small amount of water running through your reactor to cool it. These things are relatively easy to improvise, and you shut down the reactor. It doesn't need anywhere near as much water. Then you just got to keep the cooling pools full. I don't see any of that as ever being critical. The way I see it is, head of the Wagner Group was basically right. They were fighting a losing war. They were fighting a war of attrition with a better equipped enemy, again, thanks to Allied supply of military weapons. But you're in a war of attrition where what's going to happen is it's the Borg. They are relentless. They will grind you down. Your reserves will be gone. And when you no longer have enough to man the front line, it'll collapse. And when it does, the most likely scenario is the Ukrainians just move to the sea, at which point all of this area here becomes basically undefendable, because it can only be resupplied via this route here, a single route to resupply all of that area there, and that's probably not going to happen. It's also the end. If Russia had like maximum efforts to keep this as a front line, this actually extends the front line significantly, which means if they don't have enough to maintain this as a front line, then they don't have enough to maintain this as a front line. So the expectation is the war of attrition just grinds Russia down till it can't hold the front line anymore. And that's basically it. And what comes out of the end of this is the military has been attenuated to the fact that the entire Soviet military can't hold a front line about that long. And for certain, when they're doing it, they have absolutely nothing to stop a small bunch of mercenaries just driving up the road to Moscow. So I don't see how long till this collapse happens. Well, just taking the straightforward reading of the Wagner Group, where he's basically now calling it for what it was, that the idea that when they first invaded Ukraine. They came all the way down here. They came all the way down here. They had all of this, and they even managed to get across the river like that. And they got pushed out of here. They got pushed out of here, and they got pushed out of here. And yeah, the Wagner group leader basically called it for what it was. It was an unnecessary invasion that was running competently, and not a lot has really changed since. And his complaints about we don't have enough ammo, and yeah, these are their best troops, and yeah, it looks like inevitably all that's going to happen is this front line is going to get ground down, and eventually, they'll just be able to drive through it. And when you can do that, it goes, things go south. It's a positive feedback thing. So now, according to you had the head of the Wagner group sort of greeted like a rock star here, and you take a look at the interviews with the people in Moscow, and they're sort of fairly apathetic about all of this. That if there was complete defeat in Ukraine, would it really affect Putin's control? And a lot of the sort of sentiment is not really. They're just not that invested in this sort of thing. For his standing in the rest of the world, this has been absolutely fantastic. So bleeding out almost the entire of the Russian military in this grinding war of attrition. They're essentially a broken force for a decade, that sort of thing. At which point, Ukraine kind of joins NATO, and well, Putin will be dead in a decade anyway. If a coup doesn't get him, old age probably will. Anyway, so I don't see any other reading of this than this is the beginning of the end for Putin. So, hope you enjoyed that as an analysis. If you did, drop a thumbs up on it, and I will see you next time. Ciao.